we haven't mentioned yet taking care of yourself, talking about being with my wife and child and my friends and spending time on the cases, but also I couldn't perform, and knowing myself. What you helped me kind of with recently was knowing that a big part of my job is to be a performer, and you gave me the LeBron James rapid recovery model, and it was hard. It's hard for me because I don't, talking about myself like we're doing now does not come natural to me. I like to help other people, but I don't really stick up for myself a lot.
Welcome to Great Practice, Great Life by Atticus Incorporated. What if you could hang out with successful small and solo law firm attorneys, ask them about their successes and failures, their business strategies and mindset habits, then take an insight or two to guide your own growth in your practice? Each week, Steve Riley shares an in-depth look at how to work less while maintaining high client service standards, reduce your stress levels while growing your income, and find time to make changes when you are time-starved. Steve is a lawyer coach for more than 20 years and a former trial attorney. His goal is to provide strategies to help you balance your lives and grow your practice. Now, here's Steve.
Hi, it's Steve Riley. Welcome to this episode of Great Practice, Great Life. Today, I've got a special guest, a long-term friend, one of the top attorneys in the state of Texas, if not the country. He's renowned as a phenomenal trial lawyer. His resume, his CV, and everything will be in the show notes. But for me, working with top trial attorneys in the country, I think this guy is in the upper 1%. So with that, I'd like to welcome Sean Lyons to this show. So Sean, welcome. It's great to have you.
Thank you. Awesome to be here.
Yeah. So we've been trying to get you on this. I think we've been trying to schedule this for 6 to 7 months, and you are just got a really demanding trial schedule. So before we get too far into your practice and some of the lessons and things that you're going to share with our members today, our audience today, could you tell me just briefly what was the motivation for you to become a lawyer? And, what was the inspiration? What was the origin story? What's the thing that got you to say, that's it, I want to be a trial attorney?
Yeah, there's kind of two answers. So my father is a great trial lawyer. He's a real pathfinder in medical malpractice law here in Texas, and he's a great dad, wonderful guy. He's still my law partner. The firm is Lyons and Lyons, and because I rejoined him recently. But so he was a real model for me. And so the question was, why wouldn't I become a trial lawyer for a while there? Because I was so kind of hell bent and enjoying watching him, and I entertained all kinds of things. I tried to fight it in some ways during college, and then always kept going to law school as an option. But I liked writing. I was actually taking acting classes. I was studying psychology. Thought about even going into medicine maybe because I liked sciences. But seeing all the things that the law provided, and most of all, probably the righting of wrongs, as corny as that sounds. I mean, I saw my father do it and get off on it, both professionally and, during the civil rights period. He was a civil rights activist in San Antonio. And I don't know, I just never got away from the fact that I would want to do something about things that I saw that I didn't like. To be an anti-bully, it became a personality that I was already exhibiting signs of as a younger person. So, the law just sort of ticked every box. I could perform, I could gamble a little, I could use strategic thinking, I could study the law. I was a bit of I was kind of a scholar mentality, and so but really what I couldn't get away from the most was it would give me an outlet to sort of take on bullies and right wrongs. So that was kind of it for me. It was sort of a crossing out of other options. And when I got to law school, I went through the whole process again. Law school was tough at first, and I was wondering, why did I do this? But eventually kept coming back to sticking with it because I liked doing stuff about, things that I thought were wrong.
Well, that's the interesting thing about your practice, and interesting thing about you. You've always been you don't really get overly driven by the economics of a case. And it's one of the challenges to be a really top trial lawyer is they have to understand the finances of a case. But for you, you've always been a David versus Goliath kind of guy. You've always been, if you think it's some injustice, if you think there's a bullying by a major corporation against an individual, those seem to be the cases that really catch your attention and really capture your imagination and makes you a very, very dangerous advocate, quite frankly, for the other side. It's very hard when it's more than about money. When you're taking on a case, it's very hard for the other side to defend somebody who thinks that way. It makes it very difficult for them to advocate against you or wrestle with you. So it's one of the fascinating things about you. I've really noticed that over the years.
Well, and that's actually probably you're right, and that's the discipline that I've had to kind of create and engender, and Atticus has been really helpful with it. Has been to fight that, because all the economic problems I've ever had, all the challenges I've ever had professionally, have been a result of taking the wrong case for that didn't have much economic hope, and then being embroiled in that for 2, 3, 4 years. Or in the case of my partner, when I joined him, he's been embroiled in a case for 30 years that we worked on together for my 9 years with my former partner. So that it does create a challenge when that's the reason you went into law, and if you find that you're heavily balanced on your case profile and with a whole lot of quixotic missions and not a whole lot of ways to pay the bill, you get upside down and exhausted, and so it's something I've had to fight against my whole career is that.
Yeah, I mean, it's a fascinating thing to watch that there's a lot of lawyers that will take bad cases for the right reason, and they're usually emotional reasons, things that they think where somebody was greatly wronged. And there's a lot of lawyers that are very, very tight if this is not strong economic motivation for them to take the case, regardless of the wrong done to the plaintiff or the client. They're just not interested. So you've really been able to figure out a balance to that and work through a balance of that. I want to talk a little bit about the basics of your practice, and then I want to ask you some other questions. So if you could you give everybody like the basics, like what your website is, how to find you, and then I got a couple other questions behind that.
Yeah, the website is lionsandlions.com with and spelled out, and it's a new website. We like it. We just got it up and running. But the specialty of our practice is medical malpractice, especially birth injury cases, and medical devices, one of which we just settled just recently. And so we do a lot of work in both those areas. I mean, I'd say that most cases are medical malpractice cases, but when we get a medical device case, it's huge. So it's almost just as much of what we do. And that's our focus. We do also other catastrophic injury cases, and I have throughout my career. I've done asbestos work and dram shop cases, civil rights cases, but our bread and butter and what we do mostly here at Lyons and Lyons is medical malpractice and medical devices.
Yeah, and then you've developed almost a national specialty in the medical devices case as far as very complex medical devices. So I want to talk to you about that for just a minute, like your practice model. So for our members who are listening, they've heard me talk about this before. There's a couple different practice models, and Sean, your practice model is what I would consider an expert's expert. And the expert model requires you marketing more and more to other attorneys. It's pretty much an attorney to attorney marketing model because you're getting known as the go-to person in that niche. The second thing about this particular model, some lawyers, as they grow their practice, are just desperate for cases. Like if this looks like a good case, I might make a little bit of money off of it. I'll take the case. You're at a point in your career, and I think you and I have spent probably the past year and a half working on your intake system, which is very complicated. It's a very complicated intake system because you get so many cases from attorneys, you get so many referrals, you get so many complex matters. It's really hard to refine. But I want people to understand a little bit of the dynamics. You carry about how many cases a year? I know the number, but how many cases a year do you personally carry in your firm?
We've in either litigation or pre-suit, we've got about 30 active cases.
Yeah, so this is important to understand. So, but your revenue per case is astronomical. But to get to a point where your reputation is where you pick 20 or 30 really great cases, you're probably trying a couple of cases a year comfortably. Um, it requires you to have a referral system, though, and a marketing system that you're looking at how many cases a year to get 30.
About 1,000,
Yeah.
give or take a few hundred.
Yeah, so give or take 200. So you're probably I think at 1 to 2% of the cases that are referred in or that have come through your website or come whatever way. You're only taking about 1 to 2%.
Yeah. I used to say we take 1 out of 10, and then I started saying, looking at the math, and I was like, no, it's more like 1 out of 20 or 1 out of 30. Then I looked at the math again, and now it's really a lot less.
Yeah, it's a lot less, and this is important to understand because in the nature of your practice, the complex, the cost of trying a case, the expert costs in trying a case is significant. So a lot of lawyers don't really appreciate that your model is pretty much, let's just say we're looking at not looking, but we're getting 1,000 to 1,500 referrals a year. But of those, we're only taking 1 to 2%, which might be the opposite of like a family law lawyer or the opposite of an estate planning lawyer, where their whole goal is a higher volume, but the revenue per case is not seven figures. The revenue per case might be, a couple $1,000 or $5,000, and some PI lawyers that are, I'd say, neighborhood PI lawyers are doing car accident cases, slip and fall cases. Your specialty requires a large net, a high volume of intake, but the ability to refine and choose very carefully the best case, because you're not going against you're not going against a a, a new lawyer. You're going against, from a defense perspective, really high level trial lawyers, right? you're
Yeah, I see the same lawyers over and over again, and they all know me. We've known each other for 25, 30 years. We've put each other's kids through college, and and that's what, and you also, the defendants are hospitals, doctors, or device company, so it's either a 800-pound gorilla or it's some doctor or hospital that's defending their reputation. That if they settle for almost anything significant, they're going to have to report it to the National Practitioner Data Bank, and their insurance might go up. So there's reasons why we're going to have to fight. Usually, we're going to have to march all the way up that hill on the case to get them to pay really anything significant. There's no settlement. I have clients ask me all the time, well, could you just write a letter and see if they'll settle? And I say, no, I really can't do that. That would be a bluff that I'm not willing to follow through on. If I do that once or twice, then I'll never be able to get early settlements for my clients again. And so, yeah, there has to be a pretty serious threshold in this kind of law.
And that's an important thing to understand, that as you work up your trial skill, your practice model, and how you design your practice, both from a production, getting cases developed, worked through, and tried, to how you get leads in to see if they're good, is a very, 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 I like to think of it like, going through a coal mine trying to find diamonds. So you're digging through a lot of coal to find a couple of diamonds, and it takes a while. There's nothing quite as a good salesperson as a referring attorney or the injured plaintiff, right? So you have to go through and really evaluate these cases. So it's a very, very, and I just want to spend a few minutes here because I want people to appreciate that to have the type of practice that you have, to have the reputation that you have, there are some extraordinary demands on you professionally. And, it's really hard to kind of win with juries and win with your family and win with life, because you have so many significant damages at risk, I guess, the significant cases that more than likely you're going to end up trying. When I was doing PI work, I was probably settling, I don't know, 75, 90% of the cases pre-trial if I was lucky. In your case, you taking a case, you're already working in your mind on the jury instruction. So it's a radically different model that a lot of lawyers, I don't think, greatly appreciate.
Yeah, and from a marketing perspective, importantly, even the cases that we're not taking, especially the cases we're not taking, often it requires an explanation. that sometimes I must give to the person, the referrer or the client, to kind of explain why, you may have a meritorious case here. And that's time consuming as well. And I'm trying to figure out a way to be able to do that on volume, like with all the cases we're saying now, and still have time left over to handle the cases like I'm supposed to. And that's always a really hard nut to crack.
Yeah, it's probably the biggest nut to crack in your practice. It will continue to be the biggest nut to crack in your practice, I think, for a while. So let me ask you this question. What strategies, what thoughts, what way would you help other lawyers who are looking at either having a trial practice or a niche or becoming kind of the expert in their field? How would you, what would be the like top 5 pieces of advice you would give them? Like let's kind of take this apart a little bit. Like what would be the first thing that you would say if a lawyer came up to you and said, wow, Sean, I want to be like you, what do I have to do? What would be the first piece of advice would you give them?
Well, I mean, to cut to the chase, where this all leads, and it's probably like number 4 on my list chronologically of what I've learned. um, the first thing I would say is you got to know yourself really well. And this started for me with, I learned a lot from my father and from his model. I actually worked with him and his partner for 5 years early in my career. And, at that point I was raised with a huge work ethic, a huge drive to right wrongs, et cetera, and had a whole lot that was kind of what was going to help me be a good lawyer. And his partner was a fantastic mentor as well to me. But all that kind of led to me just working my ass off, for every solution, every problem was go into the office for 20 hours in a row and kill it, and then after at a certain point, I broke away and I went to the Trial Lawyers College, which is the Jerry Spence Ranch up in Wyoming, and the lesson I learned there was, to really be great at what we're doing, you have to really dig into not only understand your clients' battle, what they're going through. In our cases are catastrophic, so really how somebody's handling a catastrophic illness or how much they were traumatized by this experience. You have to kind of get into your own traumas and do this same kind of, they call it psychodramatic work on yourself, so you can see what it feels like to dig down and kind of open yourself up in the way you're asking the client to open themselves up to communicate with the jury and to effectively be the medium for the client. And so that became like another form of emotionally exhausting work that was piled on top of just the hard work it was to be a good lawyer that I was learning to do. So that's kind of the preface, just in every way, emotionally and physically, and just time consuming just to work your butt off was the early lessons. And so that was sort of that was the first entry into kind of know myself to make it successful. But what followed was me just being exhausted and me having troubles in my marriage, and then we had a baby, and I was not there when she learned her first words, and I literally commented to the jury to great effect at the time, but I wasn't being a very good father and husband at that time, and so around that time I changed jobs and started to get to know you guys, and so the first lesson, I guess, was to try to really make time and schedule time with the family, to create some balance there, because I was going to burn out. I was not going to work well if I started getting a divorce and if I started being a terrible father. And I'd seen models of that too all around me, right? And so I started looking back at how my father managed to be a good dad, and seeing some of the other ways he was doing that he wasn't maybe highlighting for me so much, was that he did take care of himself, and he was there for us. I learned, I guess, that big rock, little rock analogy that we all know, and that really hit home for me. And so that was kind of the first lesson, was to really schedule and create time for family and put it on the calendar, block for it, get your staff to block for it, really prioritize it, make it a planned, scheduled thing to make sure you have balance in your life.
That's probably one of the more critical ones that I think a lot of young lawyers don't appreciate until they get to the point that you were at, where they have enough pain and enough frustration. They feel like their marriage is at risk. They are not happy about how they're performing in their relationship with their kids or other relationship. They get they start to really question. They start to see that their values are not in alignment with who they want to be as a father, or as a parent. It doesn't matter. The strategy that you're recommending is to reprioritize the calendar and pre-block family time first and put that ahead of the work time. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, or at least give it equal consider. I was having it was just sort of it was the little rocks. It was turning out to be the little rocks for me because I wasn't even knowing that analogy. That's just what was happening. I was saying yes, and and that's kind of the second part of this was that as soon as I started prioritizing. So this would be like lesson two. As soon as I started doing that, prioritizing family, scheduling, making it first, as you're saying, or at least giving it equal billing. It set up a tension, right? Because suddenly, at that point I was saying yes to every great opportunity. I was trying to grow a practice along with my partner at the time in Austin, and he had a lot of control over what we were saying yes to, and so which I had agreed to him having control over that, and so I realized there's all this tension here. I'm not in control of how much work I'm having to do to be the lawyer I am promising to be to clients that I meet. I'm not having time to do the deep work, and and so saying yes to my family suddenly meant I can't keep these other commitments. And so the second thing was I had to learn to say no, and I wasn't a no guy. I was a yes and guy. And so I had to really kind of develop a whole new skill, which was just saying no to something that was meritorious and that was worth my time and that was a great wrong to be righted. And I had to say, yeah, but I don't have time for that. And that's still a difficult thing, and still something I have to continue to exercise that muscle. But by saying no to cases where we don't feel like we can make a significant impact for our client, that we can't fulfill the wishes of our client, I'm able to spend more time on cases where I really can have an impact for the client and have a significant impact for them, and more time doing the deep work that's necessary to increase that impact for my client. Trying to learn that and learn the value of doing that was critical to follow lesson number one, which was prioritizing my family and stay good at all the other stuff that was so important to me up to that point.
Well, it's interesting. I mean, as I listen to you and I think about it, I think the first time I met you was in Dominate Your Market, and you were in there with your prior partner before you joined your father and have really caused his practice, or your mutual practices, to explode. As I think about it, and I reflect back on it, it's interesting that your percentage of case selection probably went from 30% yes to maybe 1 to 2% yes. And so you couldn't take everything. So what you had to do was decide more or less to niche. So you had to find a balance. Like, this is time with my family. I got to have this time with my family. I got to have this time for me to recover from a trial, which in itself takes some recovery. And then as you grew the practice and your reputation grew, you get more and more referrals and more leads. So your percentage of yes goes from, let's just say, 50% to 30% to 10% to 1 to 2%. I would say in the next 1 to 2 years, you're probably going to be down to 1% of yeses of the cases are coming. Now, those are big yes, they're big cases, but you're probably narrowing it because you have to narrow the opportunity, I guess the funnel of opportunity somehow, to make sure that you keep the focus on your commitment to your family, commitment to your daughter. Does that make sense? Does that translate?
Yeah, and that is a big part of it. Another key at that time. So I was living in Austin at that time in a partnership with a guy who I joined partially because he did these great cases that were in Hawaii, and the clients were there were these DBCP cases, and he took asbestos cases all over the country. I'd been doing birth injury cases all over the country, so a big part of my practice, it was national. I was a member of, and I am still a member of, the Hawaii bar and New Mexico bar and Oklahoma bar, but I had practiced in California and Massachusetts and Florida, and took on a whole bunch of cases in Missouri and Southern Illinois, and so suddenly I was saying, well, should I be saying yes to those kinds of things that require me to travel 8 hours on a flight to Honolulu, or go see clients in Central America, and the answer is sort of like yes to some of it, but I can't do all that. It's crazy. I wasn't seeing my daughter and my wife, and when I was stressed out and exhausted, and so yeah. So there was sort of two versions. It was the quantity of what we're saying yes to, and also being strategic about it. Really examining what's this going to cost me, what's this going to take, so I could keep all the commitments I needed to keep.
Yeah, it's a big deal. I mean, it's a really big deal. So, what helped you be more strategic? If you're giving advice to someone who's listening this and they're saying, I can relate to what Sean's saying, what are some of the ways that you could advise someone to be more strategic in their thinking about that?
Just constant reexamination. And there was another component that you helped me with more recently, which was, we haven't mentioned yet, taking care of yourself. I'm talking about being with my wife and child and my friends, and also spending time on the cases. But so but also I couldn't perform. And knowing myself, what you helped me kind of with recently was knowing that a big part of my job is to be a performer. And you gave me the LeBron James rapid recovery model, and it was hard. It's hard for me because I don't. That's like talking about myself like we're doing now does not come natural to me. I like to help other people, but I don't really stick up for myself a lot. And talk, and so that really took some convincing, and I know it took us several sessions, and you really worked on me on that, and I wish I could remember better when it started to really break through for me, but I know that I still do deep dives. I still do long periods of work, but I'm strategic about doing that, not right up to the point where I have to perform. Not the night before I go into a hearing or a crucial deposition. I have to build in some time to recover, because the performance part is so important. Um, and that just created a habit of self-care generally, and so and that's when kind of the light bulb went on with all these things, that really knowing myself, kind of understanding what I can and can't do, how smart am I really, not just how smart do I want people to believe I am, how much time do I need to study this issue, how much time do I need to recover after I've done that to perform well and explain the issue, or to somebody else. It really takes a lot of honesty. It takes a lot of hard work and self-discovery and self-examination.
That's good. That's really good. I think, and I'm going to try something with you here, and you can tell me if you agree with my hypothesis here. My experience is, as a young lawyer, and whether you're starting your practice, starting as an associate, opening up your own solo, or you're a team lead, and you're trying to establish your career, your primary strategy is to work hard. And you work hard to learn some skills and to wrap your brain around the subject matter that you're resolving for clients. Then the second stage is you start to realize it's more about your ability to perform at peak on a consistent basis. So your ability to actually be in a zone on a regular basis is far more important than the hours that you work. And so you go from a classic Ford industrial model of hours in, hours out, to more of a Peter Drucker knowledge worker, where it's hard to measure. And I think this is one of the reasons that lawyers struggle with this, is that it's hard to realize that your performance your performance shifts, because really what you're trying to do is produce higher quality results by solving complex problems. And the more that you're in a high zone of performance, interestingly enough, the more you can solve those complex problems quicker and more effectively. So it's kind of a shift that I see lawyers go through. I went through the same shift as a young lawyer. I just worked my ass off, learned the business, did a lot of cases. But it wasn't until I got older that I realized, hours in, hours out doesn't really matter much. What really matters is the effectiveness of what I'm doing in those hours more so than anything else. Does that make sense? Does that communicate to you?
Yeah, it does. And there's a strategy that sometimes when I see I'm going to have to work 15 hours to study these five, these five elements of this issue to understand it well, or I got to, I've got five different, say, projects to get out the crucial discovery. There's five angles to this case that we really pressure points that we're going to push. And I'll push myself away and say, that's not realistic. I can't do that and keep my practice right. Sometimes I'll say that's just way too much to do. And I'll go exercise, or I'll go do another project, or I'll go. And that's when sometimes I'll see, oh, I don't need to do all five of those things. These two are the critical ones. Or I could delegate this part. There's a way to problem solve. When you see there's too big of a mountain of work than you can handle, there's some that you gotta shove yourself away and say, okay, what's another way to tackle this problem? Is there some of this that can wait? Is there some of this that can be delegated? And that's, because definitely in the past I would try all five of those things. I would just say, well, looks like we're staying up all night,
Yeah.
and that was my way of solving that problem. Now I'm like, no, hang on, that's not realistic. You're not going to be able to perform tomorrow if you do that. So, yeah, so I'm working it out.
Yeah, but it becomes more, and this is one of the things that I try myself and the other practice advisors try and bake into our programs. I think the group programs or working with a coach is so important, is that you don't have many times to self-reflect and study your own performance in the context of your own practice. You don't have opportunities to take a step back and say, how am I performing? Am I improving? Am I more effective? Am I more efficient? Am I solving problems quicker, faster, cheaper? Am I, thinking about the same issue the same way? Have I shifted? So it's important. I think the self-reflection is very, very important. What other advice would you give lawyers who are looking to grow their practice? What other thoughts would you give them?
Especially younger lawyers, embrace change, look forward to change. And this is really not so connected with or maybe it is, but not so connected with the whole thing here of knowing yourself and examining yourself that we've been kind of talking about so far. But it's just become such an important mantra for me, and strength to sort of hone and play off of is that, I'm a medical malpractice specialist in Texas, which has suffered arguably and probably the most tort reform in that area. So we operate under a cap of $250,000 for non-economic damages, in addition to other hurdles that must be jumped and pitfalls that we can fall into. And I don't. A lot of my colleagues complain about that. A lot of lawyers who don't do medical malpractice say that's the reason they don't do it. But it's the reason I have a niche. It's the reason there's a handful of folks in Texas that I compete with. It's the reason I don't have a billboard and don't need a billboard. People know how to find me. And so, in the way that change is very problematic in some ways, I found a way for it to work for us in my practice. And I just think that's a good way that's kind of set me on a model of how to look at change, And I think the analogy you and I've talked about is sort of like whitewater rafting. You don't learn to be, and you don't get certified as a class 5 whitewater rafter unless you learned how to and can navigate the big old rocks out there. And it's probably way more fun in whitewater rafting to be shooting through the water part, and that's the white water you're rafting, but the rocks are there, and they're there, and that's why you got the class 5 certification, and you get to call yourself a class 5 rafter. And so don't complain about the rocks. They're part of the whole deal. And that's just, and lately we've been dealing with AI, for example. And there was a great mantra that a company I was doing a seminar, or at a seminar on with the injury board, and they said, I'm going to get this wrong. I'm going to probably paraphrase it, but they said, don't be afraid that AI is going to replace you. It might, but if you don't embrace AI and start using AI, you will be replaced by the people who do. So in other words, you can. There's no point in fearing change. You just have to understand it's going to happen, and you might as well start working with it.
This is I think the crux of what distinguishes our members from what I would call the average lawyer, is that our members know change will occur. There will be rocks in the rapids. And part of being in the community that we're in is to work together, how to identify, navigate, work with the rocks, but not to say, well, I can't go in the rapids because there's rocks and I'm afraid of rocks. I don't like rocks. I don't like change. I'm good if I like change when other people change, but I don't like when I change. I have to change. So I think the ability to learn, manage, and cope with change is probably one of the most critical growth skills for any human being, regardless of who they are and what they do. But you seem to master that. You've gone through a couple of major shifts in your career. While you've always been a trial lawyer, you've done a couple major shifts, major refocusing. So anything else you want to say about that before I ask the next question?
Well, maybe just what you mentioned there about me changing. It was interesting. I was just at my 30th law school reunion, and a very good friend to me, who I've kept up with through the whole thing, as we met a couple others. He looked at me after we had an encounter with one of our old law school mates that we're not as close with, and he goes, "People don't change," you know. And I laughed because I totally agreed, right, in some ways. And then I kind of said in my own voice to myself, um, well, I change a little, and I thought, well, that's very conceited to agree with the general concept that people don't fundamentally change, but then secretly believe, well, I'm special, I change. And I've thought about that since. That was about a week ago. And I've thought about that kind of conceitedness and how that can't be true. And it kind of, what came out of it for me was maybe I don't fundamentally change, but I do figure out a way to change my habits, so that what's most fundamentally important about me finds another way to express itself, another way to work in the changing environment. And I don't know, but I certainly hope I change in ways that I treat other people, in the ways that I know I've changed in being a better husband and better father, after confronting these things. So it's complicated. It's a little bit of both.
Yeah, I think you have changed. I think you do change. I think the capacity to learn how to change and be able to explore change is probably one of the most core elements of you being an effective trial lawyer. Going back to the Jerry Spence Trial College, the technical aspects of how to try a case were not what you learned. What you learned was to embrace your own emotional pain so you could connect with the pain of your client, so you can explain that pain to a jury.
Yeah.
That's a pretty major shift away from what I would consider the classic academic approach to trying a lawsuit, trying a case in front of a jury. What
Yeah.
you're talking, does that make sense?
Yeah, it's like the difference between Laurence Olivier's acting and other more modern actors doing method acting.
Yeah.
It's and I think it's required in modern trial to do the method acting, to get in there and open yourself up and be real.
Because then the authenticity of who you are, the owning of your plaintiff's pain, the owning of their story, makes you a very, very powerful and effective advocate. So I think we maybe to a certain extent we don't change, to another extent we do change. Hey, Steve, I just want to talk to you for a minute about a new workshop that we've been teaching. It's probably my favorite workshop to teach right now. It's called The Path to a Great Practice and a Great Life. So it doesn't matter if you're a member or if you're new to Atticus, this is a perfect place to come and start your journey of what a great practice and a great life looks like to you. There are 4 elements to the workshop. So we're going to play for 4 things. 1, we're going to play to double your income. We're going to look for ways of increasing profits to pay for changes in your practice. We're going to look at what key business skills drive business growth for you in your practice. And we're going to look for ways of increasing the capacity in your practice to drive revenue. The first is about your income. If you're going to have a great practice and a great life, you're going to need some cash. So when it comes to building cash, the first thing that you want to do is look for ways of breaking through your income. One of the questions I always get asked is there a shortcut? Is there a quicker and easier way of making more money? There is, but there's a catch to it. In order to make more money, you want to study how other lawyers have increased the income and the growth of their practice. One of the things we've done at Atticus for the past 35 years is study what the top 20% earners do, what the top 10% earners do, and ultimately, what do the top 1% earners do? One of the things that we do in the Path to Great Practice and Great Life workshop is reveal and look at what are the 4 core strategies of a top 1% attorney and how you can learn from that 1%er in increasing your practice. Now, that doesn't mean you have to be a 1% attorney, but you can study how the top players perform better, and that can be your shortcut. To grow your practice faster, you need to have a bold vision for what your life looks like. The wind in your sails for growth is ultimately the vision of what a great life looks like. In my experience, lawyers that have a terrific, powerful vision for a great life will grow a great practice quicker, faster, and more efficiently than those who don't. The next thing you need to do is focus on the steps to execute on your vision. It's one thing to have a dream. It's another thing to take action and build foundations under that dream. That's the next thing that we'll work on the workshop. What are the steps you're going to take immediately from the workshop to start building on your vision of a great life and great practice? So if you're a fan of the conversation of what a great practice and great life looks like, this is the greatest opportunity for you to take action now and register for the workshop so we can work together on taking your vision of your great practice and great life and making it come to life. A link to register is included in the show notes, as well as a longer video by me explaining each element of the workshop. If you're a member of Atticus, it's included already in your membership. If you're new to Atticus, I'm giving you a promo code that will take $500 off. All you have to do is click the link below and put in podcast 500 and it'll get you the discount. So hit the link, register for the workshop. I look forward to seeing you there. With that, I hope you enjoy the rest of the episode. If you could start your practice over, what's probably the number one thing you would do differently?
I don't know. I think I would start from the beginning with the knowledge that key selection, getting involved in the cases that a lesser number of cases that I could handle would, that lesson. I wish I had that lesson earlier.
Got it. So for you, it's case selection, client selection, and then tighter on that at the very beginning would probably shift at how you practiced.
Yeah.
So that's a great lesson for any lawyer at any point in their career, that they don't have to work with everybody, but it's really terrific for their practice if they choose to work with great people, great clients, great cases, great referral sources, which requires, at the end of the day, terrific marketing. So here's the next question for you. As you look back at the growth of your practice, and you've had tremendous growth, you and I were talking that the amount of revenue you've collected the first quarter it's pretty staggering in comparison to past years. So let me ask you this. What do you think were the 3 growth strategies that allowed you to build the practice to what it is today?
One, I got very strategic and started, I built an Excel file, which was pretty nerdy, pretty businessy, and outside my general qualifications. But I took 2 business aspects of what I was doing when I took over the firm very seriously. One was I had to be, disciplined about which cases would financially succeed and which ones would not financially succeed. And so I started being very meticulous on how I tracked all those cases, and I compared. I anticipated a fee. I anticipated how much they would cost. I anticipated the ROI, and then I actually, when we wrapped up the case, I recorded what the fee was, what the costs were, and what the ROI was, and then I've been able to go back and examine that and say these kinds of cases are working, these kinds of cases aren't paying off. So that was one big strategy that worked. Another one was, I made some very hard decisions that enabled me to calculate that, and another program I instituted enabled me to kind of look at, for example, I had one, big firm here in town that has billboards and does all car crashes and other kinds of cases like that, was sending me all their medical malpractice cases, which I was overjoyed with. But I looked back after 1 year at 200 referrals from that one referral source, and we hadn't prosecuted one of those cases. One reason or another, we had learned that all 200 of those were not good cases. So I made the very hard decision to go sit down with that lawyer who I like a lot, and we had a talk, and I just showed him this isn't working for us. We're exhausting ourselves handling these intakes and sending the rejection letters, and explain to him, this isn't working for me. and invited him to either let me in to talk with your staff to filter and teach them about what kinds of cases would work for us, or just stop sending us your cases. And it was a very open choice I gave him. It was a crucial conversation, as you folks have taught, and I handled it like a crucial conversation. With First, I really love that you've trusted us for a year with sending us your cases, et cetera. And but that kind of that was a huge no, right? Like from a lawyer trying to learn to say no to cases, I was saying no to a referral source that had sent us 200 looks, and so that was a very disciplined thing I did that worked out. And that really exercised that big muscle for the first time, and so um, and that took actually a lot of study. So I guess what I'd say is the practice that I did there was I built the way to analyze uh, what referrals were working and were not, and I was able to work with that so that he had no hard feelings when he had to make that decision for me. He understood completely as another business person. Um, you know, so that's a couple of them. Another thing that I was able to do with the tracking of the cases was to see which, this is a little harder to explain, but which cases um, were taking a long time and why. And that kind of gave me a lot of insight into what sections of our practice needed more attention. The pipeline, which portions of the pipeline really needed focus, and which kinds of cases are going to require a lot here to keep it moving. And I built this sort of model and explained to my firm, and I kind of put people in particular chairs along the pipeline, and really helped me focus. And I hate to say assembly line, but it really helped me focus sort of who belongs in what seat, what person in that person in that seat was going to have the accountability, the responsibility for making sure that that portion of the pipeline is moving properly. And it helped me kind of go and tinker with section by section um, each portion of the pipeline. So, all those were sort of business management practices that I took. I ended up taking business and management very seriously, instead of just considering myself what you guys have called an Uber technician, and really took my job as a business owner and a manager very seriously, and it really helped me out.
Yeah, so you did three things very powerfully. I'll just see if I can summarize it quickly. One was your Excel spreadsheet that you talked about is kind of what for our members we would call a very sophisticated cash flow focuser that allowed you to evaluate cases and also, for lack of a better word, score cases as far as the quality of the cases. And so you start to use that as a learning tool to really evaluate what were really A cases, A plus cases for you. The second thing you did was to evaluate the quality of referral sources, because there were one of the things that you've really done a great job with over the past 12 to 24 months is reducing your personal time and intake, because you are personally approving cases, but I think we've gotten your time down from maybe a crushing 20 hours a week down to maybe 2 hours a week, which has to be done to free you up to do the more highly leveraged trial work and mediation work and case workup for these complex cases. The third thing is that you've gotten a lot more strategic on your workflow, just looking at how you request, manage medical records, manage electronic files. I mean, I think in the most recent medical device case that you settled, I think my recollection, you were looking at over 1 million documents. I remember us, had about 1 million documents that you were reviewing for prep. So those are pretty critical process components to a business that have nothing to do with being in front of a jury, but have everything to do with selecting a great case to get in front of a jury with.
Yeah. I really liked that you mentioned the intake getting down from, it really was 20 hours a week, and it really is now about 2 hours a week, and which seemed impossible. But yeah, so the nice thing is that each one of these, it's sort of like I don't have enough time to be a good business manager, but each one of these, the time spent focusing on business management has freed up time for me to be a better lawyer, actually litigate more, which is what I really love to do. So taking the business management seriously has resulted in me being able to do less business management, which is wonderful. I thought it was going to be a constant 50% and ever growing thing as I grew the firm, but I think I'm finding it's possible that I could do less business management if I just do it right and study it.
Yeah, this is perfect, because that's what a lot of lawyers don't really understand and appreciate, is that your ability to understand process management allows you to do a much better job of practicing law, because you're able to control what actually gets on your desk, how it gets on the desk, and the time that you have available to work on the cases. So that's the ironic thing, or the paradox about it. The better you are on the business skills, the more it frees you up to be a better lawyer. And it's the thing I keep seeing over and over and over, that most lawyers like, look, you don't understand, Steve, I just want to be a really great lawyer. And I'm like, well, you're going to be stuck at that level, whatever you're at level skill wise now, because you won't have any other time to develop, because the business processes that you built in your practice are going to limit the amount of time you have to invest in becoming a better lawyer. So if you actually want to become a better lawyer, the first thing you need to do is clean up how poorly you run your practice. And the more tight that you make that practice, the more effective and efficient, the better quality people you have, the more your marketing works for you, the more you study that, you'll actually really extraordinarily quantum leap of time to be a better attorney. That's the ironic thing about it. I've seen it over and over and over, but it's the ironic thing about it. You totally nailed it. All right, so let me ask you this. How do you stay focused? If you said this is the most impactful time management tool that I use, or time management approach, what would you say it is?
I'm a big list maker. I mean, I know that's probably a cliche and easy one, but and I wouldn't say that's how I stay focused. It's how I don't drop a ball. And maybe the way I don't stay focused is I'm afraid I'm going to drop a ball, And my dad's law partner that I worked with back 30 years ago, he used to call it spinning dishes, like when we handle, and at that time we were handling 20, 30, with my docket with that firm as a baby lawyer was 20, 30 cases, all smaller medical malpractice cases, pre-tort reform, and he was like, you got to spin dishes, because he'd see me working hard on one or two favorite cases and kind of not working up a couple others, and he was trying to train me, if you take your hand off one of those dishes or stop looking at one of those dishes, they're all going to come crashing down. And it was a great analogy. It's so true. It's so true. And so because of that knowledge, I can't stay focused unless I know one of these things isn't going to come falling down. And so the way I do that is I make pretty exhaustive lists, and I remake them. I keep a little book, that I redo daily, that has like a list on it and check boxes, and then I have a OneNote that I use for lists. So I've got three different versions of the lists going on, and each case has got its own list that I'm sharing with my staff, and then of course we have a case management system with tasks in it, and so it's almost hard to keep track of the lists, but, but because of the lists, I know at least, and I have kind of the one I carry around with me is the one, right? That's today's items. There was the one sheet that I really liked that you folks created, and I shared it with a key legal assistant at the time. I don't use that sheet anymore. I just do this thing I carry around, but it had like the three things that had to happen today, and then other things that if you get those three done. It was a really nice one sheet, and I used that for a while, which really rebuilt my habit to continually make lists every day.
That's perfect. So the tool that you're talking about is a tool that I think's been around for 20 years. It's called the Atticus Daily Focuser.
Yes.
And the core element of the Daily Focuser is to get the lawyer away from the computer screen, away from their phone, and step back and ask, what are the three most important things? And the three most important things come from Peter Drucker's book, The Effective Executive. And he wrote this book in the 60s, studying the top performers at General Motors. And the fascinating thing that he learned was that if you're an executive, you're managing people, about half your day is dealing with management issues. The other half of the day, you're trying to move things forward. And people are delegating things to you via email. They're delegating things to you via phone. They're delegating things to you constantly. The most important thing that he said was to take a step back and say, from your viewpoint, what are the three most important things? I usually, in the Migrate Life Focus tools, we do it on the Migrate Week. What are the three most important things for the week? On the day, what are the three most important things for the day? It's a timeless lesson that I think is probably 50 years old now, but people are people. We're still human beings performing with AI or with paper. Let me ask you this, because I've got a couple of studies and theories behind this. Why do you write it on a piece of paper?
Because I don't want to have to open anything to see it. Um, and also, I just, I'm a pre-computer person. I mean, email came into usage while I was a lawyer, so I think with my pen, and I try to take much fewer notes now because I find it hard to then import them into my case file and stuff like that. So even though I'm now developing the habit to basically it doesn't exist unless I put it in the computer, but I still write these lists up because I really think best with my pen. And when I actually make the list of what's most important to do today, I almost don't have to look at it again because I've written it out, and that's how I think.
That's perfect. It's a two-pronged strategy. Prong one is I don't want to be distracted about this because I'm thinking about it.
That's a good point. I mean, that's why I can focus. I can have a 2 hour chunk of time on one project only after I've done this, because only then do I know nothing's going to interrupt my thinking because, oh God, I meant to do this today. That's not going to happen if I've made my list.
Yeah, it gives you a way to manage anxiety because you're worried about these things. You write down, okay, these are the three most important things. It then gets it off stage out of your brain and gets it onto a piece of paper, and your brain trusts that you put it on a piece of paper. The second reason you do the writing is to engage your prefrontal cortex, which is where your motor skills will engage the prefrontal cortex. So speaking and writing will engage it. So this is a fantastic practice. I don't care if you were just starting practicing tomorrow. I think these two practices to cope with the massive amount of electronic data that you're receiving are incredible practices, because between your phone, your inbox, your Slack, your activity trackers, and your CRMs, there's a lot of data that's being flung at us. Even during this interview with you, I think I've gotten 4 texts, 5 alerts, and probably 10 emails. And those things are popping up all around me while I'm trying to stay focused with you. And it's really, you're making a decision. You're making a decision of whether you're going to focus on what your great life and your great practice looks like. Or are you going to have other people delegate to you electronically what your great practice and your great life should look like?
Yeah. And as an aside, and kind of on that, when making that list, which is at least 3, but sometimes I fudge into 5, 6 items that have to be done that day. I really want one of those at least to be a personal item, like making a reservation on vacation for my wife and I, or something that I'm supposed to do. Like when I started doing the list, it was all work stuff. Like that was my work list. And then I've kind of embracing this whole idea of balance. I've kind of said, well, I don't feel right about it unless one of those items is something I've got to do that my wife asked me to do, or something that I've got to do for my daughter, or myself. So it's good to include that, and it's kind of like a trigger if something isn't on there for 3 or 4 lists in a row that's personal. You're maybe not being balanced.
Perfect. For those of you that are listening, I'll put the link to the Atticus Daily Focuser in the episode notes so you can check it out. Some of you may have seen it. If you're new to Atticus or just a subscriber, you can check it out there. And I think we have got some, if you go to our website, we have some videos and materials to support you on how to use it. So that's great. Sean, I got a couple more questions and we'll start to wrap up. You ready?
Yep.
What is your biggest lesson when it comes to hiring, firing, managing, and building a great team?
The book Fire Fast and Hire Slow um, really resonated with me and became a mantra. I mean, and and the way it plays out is pretty complicated. But just like cases, everybody you hire is going to become part of your life. At least in my firm, which is fairly small, and just like with my family and with my clients, I want to be open and personal with my employees. And I know that's not necessarily the model for everybody. That's the way I want to operate, and that's the way I want my firm to feel. That's a feeling my clients put on our Google reviews, that it felt like I was treated like family, by a family. And we have a family-run practice. I've taken over my father's practice now. Um, so I've taken the advice. These are workers, not necessarily family members, but I've also embraced part of myself that I don't want to let go, which is people in my life that they're people I want to be close with. And so that's really made me hire slow, and carefully, and kind of not think how talented is this person, how much can this person do for me, but is this a person that is kind of on is going to be in with the ethos of our office in other ways, and believe in our cases and our clients, and be motivated by the things that we're motivated by. It's a process. It takes a little getting to know folks and a little extra. And I try not to put too much stake in an interview for that. I try to really kind of almost think of them as like I would a juror. I do research on who they are. I look up their Facebook page, and I ask people who know them. I actually will call their last couple employers, even if they don't list them as references, and just tell me honestly what's good and bad about this person. And then I the first time I had to let somebody go, I wasn't even running the firm. Someone I was an associate, and my boss at the time said, if you're not happy with your legal assistant, you've got to fire her. You've got to be the one to do it. And so I called her in and I fired her, and I hated it. I wanted to cry when she left, and thought I never want to do that again. And she and I knew each other well. She just had really fallen, and I knew she didn't like the job that much. She wasn't meant to be a legal assistant. She wasn't enjoying it. She wanted to do other things. And I saw her about a year later, and she was so happy. She had a totally different job in a totally different field, and she did everything but say she was grateful I fired her. She just made it very clear that I did her a favor by firing her, and which is how I reasoned it at the time, but I wasn't convinced of it enough to feel good about it. And so one of the things that's enabled me to fire fast is I've just asked myself, is this person really ever going to succeed here? And I need to get on with this once I've made that decision. And so I've done it several times more, and I've done it with the mindset that this is best for both of us, really. And I'm convinced it's inevitable. And so I just kind of rip that Band-Aid off and make it happen. And that's been a practice that's helped out.
Fantastic. If I could pop you in a time machine and you could go back and talk to the young Sean 30 years ago when he first started practicing or opened up his own practice, what's the number one piece of advice you would give that young man?
You need to separate how you want people to see you and not care about that, and care about how you want your life to look, and what makes you happy and what makes you fulfilled. As a lawyer, um, especially as a trial lawyer, our heroes are these huge personalities talking about how many hundreds of millions they got in a verdict. Um, they're huge personalities. Some of them narcissistic, some of them just wonderful big personality people, and there's a lot of talk about this big case or that big case, and the sort of awards and financial awards, and those things become the brass rings, the the standards and the measures of success for a young trial lawyer, along with a lot of drinking and other bad habits. And you lose sight of what you really want and why you're doing it. I mean, I've always known why I'm doing it. I'm doing it because it's fun. It's really fun to do what I do. I'm doing it because it feels important. It really makes a difference to the people I represent. They send me letters or pictures of their kid as they're growing up. I get graduation cards. Those things fulfill me. I don't really need a humanitarian award. I don't need a $1 billion verdict. I'd like those things. I'll brag about those things when they happen. I'll put them on my website. But what really gets me off is every settlement and every letter I get from a grandmother or mother about the difference I've made in someone's life. That's super, super fulfilling. And that's what it was always for me at the beginning. And I got lost in there. I got lost in the beginning part. And if I had some advice to a young me, I'd go back and say, don't get lost there. Just focus on what makes you happy and stick with it.
That's great. One of the core exercises that some of our members embrace, some of our lawyers wrap their brains around, the team leaders wrap their brain around, is really the conversation of the great life. Getting clear what your lifetime legacy will look like, getting clear your top 5 lifetime goals, getting clear what the next 10 years look like to you, that provides some clarity for what matters to you. And not everybody's great life is the same thing, but if you can get distracted in this case, and I can totally relate to what you're saying as a young attorney doing PI work, totally distracted by the lawyers that were driving the fancy cars and, whipping around in Lear jets, and very, very narcissistic culture at a certain level. But after growing, getting some gray hair and experiencing and working with some of those people, you start to realize they're status driven, not values driven. And when you're status driven, you get lost. It's because you're chasing, like you said, the next brass ring, the next achievement trophy, the next thingy, whatever that may be. But if you're values driven and it comes from your heart, your soul, then you can align your practice goals with your values. In this case, that's exactly what you've done. So congratulations. Really well done. Really well done.
Thank you.
Really well done. So let me go ahead and conclude with this. Sean, you are a byproduct of great values, great work, an incredibly open-minded growth mindset, willing to take a punch, humble, authentic. And I think because of that, it's made you one of the top tier trial lawyers in your state, if not the country. So I just want to thank you for spending time with us today. I want to thank you for the hard work that you do for bar associations around the country. I want to thank you for spending time and sharing authentically your hard-won lessons with our audience today. So thank you very much.
Well, Steve, as you know, you and Atticus are one of the keys to my success, so you're very, very welcome.
Thank you, buddy. Thanks for joining this week's episode of Great Practice, Great Life. Please tune in weekly to get the next episode. If you enjoyed the episode, please subscribe, like, and don't hesitate to share it with a friend who you think this episode could help. With that, thanks, and I hope you enjoy next week's episode.